Thank you. Welcome. My name is Sunil Naphray, a camp coach for Life Genius, and it's a great pleasure to have my guest, Mustafa Sasmaz, on today's podcast, which is part of a Mastering the Mind series where we do a deep dive and take a very close look at the human mind, what it actually is made up of, and to basically to have a greater understanding of how it works for us to harness its ultimate potential. And we're obviously going to look at some theory, but also look at the practical implications of having a better understanding of what is the mind and how it works. And in today's podcast, we're going to be looking at the three main dimensions of the mind: the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. And in a very, very short while, I'm going to be screen sharing with Mustafa, putting up a slide, so then I can then continue with this presentation. So if you just bear with me, I'm just going to go into my slide. So just bear with me. Can you see this now, Mustafa? Is this in view?
Not yet. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now it is.
It is. Okay, right. I'm just going to put this on a full slideshow. There we go. Okay. Okay. So what I have done is I have constructed a very simple diagram to show the composition of the human mind. And as you can see, it's divided up into the conscious mind at the top, the subconscious mind, and then the unconscious mind. Now, there obviously is a debate as to the exact proportions of each of these types of mind that actually make up the whole human mind. Some may say, it's not 10, maybe it's 20% conscious, or maybe the unconscious is more along the lines of 50%, or even higher than that. But I thought, just for the purpose of doing this short presentation, I'll put the conscious mind as 10%, which is the smallest proportion of the entire mind. Then we've got the subconscious, and then the unconscious mind right at the bottom. So with the conscious mind, this essentially is regarded as the short-term memory. And we normally use the conscious mind for immediate recall. So just imagine simple everyday activities where we are highly conscious of us doing them, like eating some food or drinking a glass of water or even driving. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm speaking now to you, Mustafa, conscious of the fact I'm doing a podcast with you. So these are all activities where I'm actually operating within the conscious mind, and also doing exercise. So to be able to do exercise, you've got to really be able to think, well, I'm now going to do some exercise, and then you go and do it, but you do it consciously, fully aware of what you are doing. Now, the actual layer which is behind the conscious mind is the subconscious mind. Now, some may argue that this is quite a dominant part of the human mind, around 50 to 60%, possibly. And this basically is now leaning more towards your longer term memory. And within the longer term memory, you may actually have more recent memories. And it's normally a place of reflection or intuition, or where creativity or infinite wisdom and intelligence can actually play its part. Now, this is where the superconscious comes into play, particularly where we are looking to be our most creative and to be guided by our intuition, by our inner voice. So that would be the superconscious. Now, in terms of practical examples, now you could also combine it with things that we do within the conscious mind. So for example, I could be driving my car, conscious of the fact that I'm using my gear stick and I'm using my mirror to be able to drive and look ahead. But at the same time, I might be remembering someone's mobile phone number, because I know that as soon as I finish my drive, I need to be ringing that mobile number so I can then, possibly work with another client, or I need to pay a bill. So the fact that I'm doing two things together, I'm activating my very short-term memory in using all my skills to drive. But then longer term, I've already stored someone's mobile number in my head, and I'm using my subconscious mind to be able to picture that mobile number, and then I'll bring it into conscious mind very briefly while I'm driving. And then what'll happen is when I make the phone call, when I get out of the car consciously into my house, and when I pick up the phone consciously, and then I will then find that number, and then that number, which was in the subconscious mind while I was driving, is now in the conscious mind. So that's just one example of how the two can interact together. The subconscious mind is very powerful when you are drawn on your creativity and your ability to be able to construct new things, to use your imagination. For example, project planning, or basically writing a story, which requires lots of creativity. So we tend to find that, or even writing a book, or developing an online course, or we are planning a lesson for a course, we tend to operate within our subconscious mind. So, for example, when I need to use my subconscious mind, particularly use my superconscious when I'm developing a session, developing a course, working on for example, a script for a client, when I'm about to do maybe a therapy session with them, then I will consciously sit on my chair next to my table by my computer, but subconsciously, I'm actually going back into that particular space to think of ideas, go back into my experience, go back into my skill set, find what I can, and then I'll then be able to bring it forward into the conscious mind and create that project, create that online course. Now, behind the subconscious mind is the unconscious mind, which equates to around 30-40% of the whole mind. So it's still quite dominant. As you can see, it's a lot larger than the conscious mind. Now, this is a really important space. It's regarded as the hard drive, the main storage. So regarding our the unconscious mind, it stores all of our memories, all of our past experiences are in the unconscious. And even though there may well be past experiences we want to forget, maybe hard times, maybe things were said to us, or maybe we'd experienced quite horrible experiences, that we don't want to bring them in our conscious mind or even subconscious, because it'll affect us in our ability to do things, to create things. So what we do is we push them back into our unconscious mind. So unfortunately, it comes to a place where some negative attitudes or behaviors or unwanted habits, limiting beliefs can be formed in this part of the mind. And sometimes when we are doing things automatically, like we may get into a state of stress or anxiety, and for us, the solution might be to maybe indulge with alcohol, or maybe to overeat on some foods that we shouldn't be eating too much of. Then basically something in our unconscious is telling us that there is something going on here, and you need to do something about it. Maybe your ego is telling you to go for the alcohol, go for the food, rather than using your subconscious mind to think of a creative solution on how to deal with this. So, for example, for myself as a complementary alternative coach and therapist, I'm very interested in what's happening in someone's unconscious mind, because I tend to find that that's where the greatest courage is needed by the client to be able to unearth and unpick what's delving behind the mind, behind the subconscious mind, which is determining their behavior, which is making them do things that they feel that they're not in control of. So it's a very important part of the mind for my area of work, but also for anyone wanting to understand who they are and how they function the way they function. And if they're not particularly happy with how they are, or particularly if they've had feedback from other people about their attitude, about their behavior, then it could well be something going on in their unconscious mind that they've pushed right to the back because they couldn't deal with it at that time, but it's stored up. And the thing about hard drives is if you're not careful, they can clog up because there's so much stuff in there. Let me give you a practical example. A couple of days ago, and this really happened to my computer. I didn't realize that after downloading a software called Promedian software, which allows me to use my laptop screen as an interactive whiteboard using Active Inspire, but there's some kind of a bug that was released, which actually stored up lots of additional rubbish files, which were eating up my memory. And then I couldn't make basic videos like I'm making now because of that. And so if we're not careful, if we're not keeping an eye on what we're doing, in my case, what we're downloading, and doing a check and a clearance in our unconscious part of the mind, then these things will come back. And one thing that will come back are things like shadows, which is a part of the human psyche, which actually is like a dumping ground of things that we want to forget, we don't want to deal with. It's too much, it's too hard, it's too horrific. But if we don't reconcile with it and come to terms with it, it will affect the other parts of your mind. And obviously, your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, these are very, very powerful parts of your mind, which actually enable you to actually implement your motivation. So to turn your motivation into action and into results and into outcomes. So you need all three parts of the mind to work together. Okay, now, so
Absolutely.
Mustafa, I'm going to keep the screen share on at this point, and obviously I've completed my short presentation on the different dimensions of mind. So can you tell me then what resonates with you from looking at that diagram? Can you give any other practical examples of how the unconscious, subconscious, and the unconscious mind works from your perspective? Please do share.
Yes. Well, since I come across Maslow hierarchy theory, and also at the same time I studied Freud and Carl Jung and compared them. At
Yeah,
that point, I learned conscious mind, subconscious mind, and unconscious mind. Then I became aware of those departments in our brain or in our perception or whatever you call
yeah,
it. Then, obviously, it's a well-known fact that Carl Jung said, if you make your unconscious conscious, then you are a Superman. You
yes,
become Superman, because
that's true.
you eliminate apparently all the difficulties you face in life.
Yes,
Well, I am now, when I look back, I understand all these areas, and relatively, I also understand how they function. But what I need to understand is their interaction between each other. For example, at what stage conscious mind becomes helpless, and then suddenly, automatically, subconscious mind come into the frame,
yeah,
and say to conscious mind, "Hey, you need some help from your unconscious brother.
yeah,
So shall I turn the controlling tab of it, and then you can have a trickle of information from there?" So I need to understand this. This
yes,
is because if you make things visual like that,
yeah,
uh, you know, sort of uh, tangible, if you like,
yeah,
then this un- um, talking about mind
yeah,
will become more interesting,
yes, yeah, absolutely.
because
Yes.
you need to say them, they are cousin, they are brothers or sisters or something like this.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
absolutely. And Mustafa, I want to respond to your question in terms of the relationships with them. And I want to answer the question by maybe giving you a little slice of my own story, so then it becomes clear, you know, the interaction between the conscious mind, subconscious, and unconscious. I found that before my midlife, which was around, say, 45, I believe that even though I was conscious of things to do with, I don't know, relationships, money, property, etc., etc., where things were not working and I didn't want to deal with it, and I was conscious of the fact, I was conscious of all these things. There was a problem here in this relationship, there's a problem with this property, or there's some money issue. Then rather than use my subconscious mind to be creative and to, you know, to draw on wisdom, because wisdom was lacking, I then dumped everything in the unconscious mind. I thought, I can't deal with it. It just gets dumped. So even though it's happened and I'm conscious of it, it's happened, I'd rather be unconscious. But the problem with that is if you do that, then you become slightly split. You become a bit fragmented. And because you're fragmented, because you're not interacting with each of the stages. What I should have done, I mean, now I have the insight, having been through a major midlife crisis, a major midlife review 5-6 years ago, that now, talking to you now in June 2020, compared to June 2015, I am aware of the subconscious part of my mind. So everything that I now have in my conscious mind, I use my subconscious mind as a filter. So everything is filtered. If I can do something with it, if I can create something with it, if I can, and you know, even if it means in terms of my behavior, I say no to a lot of people and I become a bit assertive, because there's nobody else that can protect me from dumping everything in the unconscious mind except me and my subconscious mind and my superconscious power and my intuition and my inner genius. I rely on these things now to filter and counteract anything which is a bit negative in the conscious mind before it gets dumped in the unconscious. Now, what I do now is, what I had to do though, Mustafa, is when I had my midlife crisis and I had a divorce soon afterwards, was that I had to unpack absolutely everything, going back into my childhood since I was 5 or 6. I had to unpack all of this stuff in my unconscious mind that was driving some of my unwanted negative behaviors that I was expressing in my midlife. And it was when I was able to do that work with some help, then I still have my unconscious mind, but I use it to store very positive memories and things that will help me drive my behavior in a much more positive way. So that's how I believe that you can interact with all of them. I just wish somebody had explained this to me at school. I sometimes think, why in school we weren't taught these things? You know, Carl Jung's work was around for years, and just a little, you know, like a little bit of personal development in schooling like this would have probably helped, would have stopped me in my 30s making the mistakes and errors that I made, where I just consciously did it and then dumped it when it didn't work. But when it worked, I would then use my subconscious mind to be very creative about celebrating. But that would be my ego speaking to me then. But rather than my full intuition, if that makes sense. Yes. You want to make some comments?
Yes,
yeah.
Yeah, but what I can see, Sunil, is that if you sort of somehow make clear borders with conscious, subconscious, and unconscious, and give sort of tangible examples of how they are reacting and working together with one another or working against each other, you can sort of create a scenario and conclusions
Yes.
of each scenario. For example, if they work together, what happens? If they don't work together, what happens?
Yes.
And whether this, in different stages of our lives, it manifests itself same or different.
Yes.
For example, in the teenage years, during the teenage years, or between 20, 30, 30, 40, 40, 50, and vice versa.
Yes.
I think you make this really enjoyable and interesting conversation, and people will listen to it.
Yes.
And this can become your great earning potential.
Well, I mean, for me, it's about serving powerfully, you know, whatever manifests really, isn't it? But you're right about the word manifestation. You see, before my midlife, I didn't know how to manifest things using using my mind. Now I feel as though that I know how to manifest if I know how I interact with each of these dimensions of the mind, and what the
Yeah,
and
I think
and
sorry.
if you understand how each of them work and how they interrelate with each other. I hope I gave some examples of how they, you know, how they're related to me, for me personally. But I'm sure anybody watching this particular podcast will start thinking about, maybe I need to contextualize for me what I do consciously, what I do subconsciously, what I do unconsciously, whether the interaction works for me or whether it doesn't work for me. And I think that's the key point, really.
It is, however, I think conscious, subconscious, and unconscious altogether are not going to be enough to put your actual point across. You
Yeah.
need to bring into this. You need to bring rational and irrational thinking, imagination ability, and then ego and experience.
I
You
mean,
need to
rational thinking and irrational thinking is going to be a topic of another podcast, because I think that would be fascinating for the audience.
correct. However,
It's going to be, but you are right. It is related to.
yes,
You are right.
yeah, but that doesn't mean you cannot use it here. You can, because if look, I think this is like this. Imagine um, subconscious is driving the driver,
Yeah.
um, but he's a relatively inexperienced young driver.
Yeah.
Then the subconscious is its what do you call it, minder, if you like,
Yes.
and asks conscious, "Are you okay? Are you okay along this road? Do you need to get some help from the driving instructor?"
Yes.
Which is unconscious.
Yes. It's a bit like
Now, but here, conscious, if conscious is behaving badly, like, you know, twisting and diving and ignoring the traffic lights, that is irrational driving.
Yeah.
And he needs a bit of rationality in his
Now, I totally.
driving behavior.
We could do a whole podcast on rational thinking and irrational thinking.
Yeah.
If I just give you one example from me, I would say that probably my dominant thinking before my midlife was irrational, but because I was able to harness what was going on in the unconscious mind and bring it to the conscious, like Carl Jung said, you know, make the unconscious conscious. It's boosted my rational thinking a lot more than it did, say, 5 or even 10 years ago. So that's from me, from my personal experience. However, when you are a rational thinker, you do think in a certain way, but sometimes irrational thinking allows for more ingenuity and creativity, and it tends to be the home of people who call themselves geniuses, because they think irrationally before they can then pick out the bits that are going to work, rather than trying to think everything in a rational, logical way. But it's about balance. Okay, we're coming to the end of the segment now, and I think I know, Mustafa, our next segment is going to be about irrational and irrational and rational thinking. But do you want to make any closing points before we finish the podcast? I'll come up to the screen share now.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yeah, I think look, I can easily call myself irrationalist, irrationalist, and this is dangerous. This is dangerous, but I am happy with it,
Yes.
because uh, rationalizing is like diluting
Yes.
things,
Yes.
diluting
Yeah.
something. Irrational is the human himself,
Yeah. Yeah.
but rational is diluted human.
Yes. That's,
That's
yes.
that I can argue, and that's a disruptive sentiment and definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is because I mean, if you rationalize the world, there is nothing to live for.
Well, that's the thing. That's where you don't get the spontaneity and the randomness which happens from irrational, the full-on creativity of ideas. It doesn't happen so much if you're totally in a rational domain. And I think I don't know whether diagram going on here between rational thinking and irrational, but I think we'll definitely give it some thought, Mustafa, before we plan our next podcast. But thank you so much for taking part. So thank you very much for everybody for watching. Thank you so much, Mustafa. We will see you again for another Mastering the Mind podcast. And yes, we will talk about rational thinking and irrational thinking. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yes.